Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Hunter Museum of American Art's 12th Annual Student Symposium. Each year we do a symposium that connects to the theme of our spring exhibit. And our spring exhibit right now is the long view from conservation to sustainability, art from the Bank of America collection. So we put out a nationwide call for papers for talented undergraduate students who were working on themes of conservation and sustainability in American culture. And we got a lot of amazing submissions, and we were able to invite 6 really talented students to share their work with us. What we'll do this afternoon is the students will present in pairs, each with a faculty member who has been working with them. And after each set of pairs are all finished, we will go ahead and begin a Q&A. But we encourage anyone with questions throughout the afternoon to write them into the chat, and we'll be monitoring that as well. I want to first welcome and introduce my 2 faculty partners in this. First, we have Dr. Bart Pushoff, who is part of the Art History Department at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. And we have Catherine Meeks Quinlan, who's the Associate Lecturer in the Department of English and co-director of the Environmental Studies at University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. And each of them will introduce the students they've been working with throughout the semester, and then we will be treated to some excellent presentations. So I'm going to pass it over to Catherine as she introduces her first 2 students.
Great. Thank you, Adira. I should have asked this before, but would you like me to read both of the students' bios at the same time? Okay.
Either way.
Okay, then I'll just introduce Emalaya first. Our first student who will be presenting. Emalaya Downer is a junior in the Integrated Studies program at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. And within the Integrated Studies curriculum, she is designing her own major, focusing on environmental studies and social sciences for her degree. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Emalaya.
All right, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Hopefully that looks right and everybody can see it. All right, my research project focuses on the American naturalist writer Mary Austin and her 1903 book, The Land of Little Rain. The Land of Little Rain is Austin's first published book, a collection of 14 essays that document the landscape, plants, animals, and people of Owens Valley, California, and the Mojave Desert at the turn of the 20th century. Austin's book makes a case for the importance of wild lands, the wisdom of the cycles of the living and the non-living world, and the knowledge that can be gained through observation and experience. Austin was a unique woman in a unique time within American history. Captivated by the natural world from a young age, she attended Blackburn College where she studied science and was class poet, graduating at the age of 20. The same year, Austin and her family relocated from her home state of Illinois to the California desert through the American Homestead Act. The Homestead Act was a major driving force of Western colonialism that gave U.S. citizens land rights in the Southwest in exchange for their cultivation of the land. This land was not uninhabited, though, and was indeed the homeland of multiple indigenous American tribes. Austin's writing in The Land of Little Rain reflects the confluence of many inspirations. Her Western scientific training and personal spiritual connection to the natural world are joined with a newfound ecological understanding of the Southwest, developed through her relationships with indigenous peoples of the area. Indeed, Austin states that the book's title comes from the Native American name for the desert land which she writes about. Austen's writing in The Land of Little Rain reflects the The Land of Little Rain is the result of over a decade of exploration and research in Owens Valley, Yosemite and Death Valley. Traveling through prospector towns, Shoshone and Paiute lands, desert mountains and valleys, Austen spent long stretches of time alone in the desert, walking and observing. She cataloged her observations by writing as well as making field drawings and photographs. The illustrations in her published book are the work of E. Boyd Smith and are based upon Austen's own field sketches. Throughout the work, Austen explores themes of the desert's vastness, the importance of water, the cycles of the seasons, and the wisdom held by the plant, animal, and human inhabitants of the landscape. In the chapter, The Basket Maker, Austen describes a Paiute woman, a single mother and artist who weaves intricate baskets from willow. Austen states in this chapter, quote, "To understand the fashion of any life, one must know the land it is lived in and the procession of the year," end quote. The theme of the importance of intentional time spent learning the landscape and the lives of its inhabitants is a reoccurring throughout the work. In Water Borders and Other Water Borders, Austen compares the natural winding mountain streams to man-made irrigation ditches many homesteaders considered necessary to cultivate their land. Of these human-made waterways, Austen writes, quote, "It is the proper destiny of every considerable stream in the West to become an irrigating ditch. It would seem the streams are willing. They go as far as they can or dare towards the tillable lands in their own boulder-fenced gullies, but how much further in the man-made waterways? It is difficult to come into intimate relations with appropriated waters. Like very busy people, they have no time to reveal themselves. One needs to have known an irrigating ditch when it was a brook, and to have lived by it, to mark the morning and evening tone of its crooning, rising and falling to the excess of snow water, to have watched far across the valley, south towards the eclipse and north to the twisted dike, the shining wall of the village water gate, to see still blue herons stalking little glinting weirs across the field," end quote. Through this observation, Austen considers the uniqueness of natural waterways and what is lost when the proprietors of these irrigation ditches fail to consider the water as anything more than a resource. In her essay, Scavengers, Austen describes the ecological function of desert buzzards. Austen writes, quote, "Probably we never fully credit the interdependence of wild creatures and their cognizance of the own affairs of their kind," end quote. She also makes the observation, quote, that is the economy of nature. But with it all, there is not sufficient account taken for the works of man. There is no scavenger that eats tin cans, and no wild thing leaves a like disfigurement on the forest floor, end quote. Her descriptions of interdependence and the economy of nature seem to be ahead of their time, aligning with modern ecological study of the patterns and relationships between living organisms and their environment. Austen published over 30 books and plays in her lifetime. She notably collaborated with Ansel Adams on his first book of photography entitled Taos Pueblo, in which Adams' photographs and Austen's work documented the landscape of the Pueblo people of Taos, New Mexico. Of all of Austen's work, The Land of Little Rain is widely considered her best. Her descriptions of the cycles, seasons, and rhythms of the desert and those who dwell upon it continue to inspire readers, and indeed inspired me. Austen's writing illustrates the importance of wild lands and the reverence she held for the natural world. The Land of Little Rain offers readers a snapshot of the primordial desert in a time of flux. Likewise, we might be inspired as readers to become more acquainted with our own surroundings and the knowledge of those who have come before us in this landscape. Austen invites readers to explore the landscape in her essay, The Streets of the Mountain, saying, quote, "Never believe what you are told, that midsummer is the best time to go up the streets of the mountain. Well, perhaps for merely idle or sportsmanly or scientific. But for seeing and understanding, the best time is when you have the longest stay. And here is a hint, if you would attempt the stateliest approaches, travel light and as much as possible, live off the land." End quote. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emalaya. We all enjoyed it just as much as your cat did. And now I'm happy to introduce Josh Kola. Josh Kola is a senior undergraduate art history major at the University of Kentucky. As a member of Phi Beta Kappa Honors Fraternity, an ambassador to UK's College of Fine Arts, and the treasurer of the UK Student Organization for Art History, Josh is always involved with the local academic and artistic community. Josh has presented research everywhere from the UK Gaines Center for the Humanities to the National Conference of Undergraduate Research. Josh plans to continue his education by attending graduate school in order to earn a dual degree in art history and library science, on track to become a processing archivist. Please welcome Josh Kola.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the introduction. I just want to start off by giving thanks to the Hunter Museum for having us here today. It's a really great opportunity. So I'm gonna start sharing my screen, my presentation. Can we all see it? It's good. Perfect. So this presentation is entitled AMD and Art, Sustainability and Artistic Land Reclamation in Present-Day Appalachia. This was part of a project I did for an internship during my junior year. And I did this internship with the University of Kentucky Special Collections Research Center. So I was working with an archival collection that was based on AMD and Art Park, which we're going to get into right now. In 1995, Dr. T. Allen Comp arrived in Vintondale, Pennsylvania. Over the next 7 years, Comp and his nonprofit, AMD and Art, would transform the landscape of this small historic mining town by reclaiming clean water and constructing contemporary art pieces in conversation with Vintondale's industrial and social histories. After Vinton Colliery Company pulled out of the town in the 1950s, Vintondale's landscape, economy, and spirit declined for decades. Orange streams and leftover coal waste piles have come to symbolize the broken communities of Appalachia, abandoned after the coal industry's decline. These environmental hazards pose health and ecological issues that often require more resources and infrastructure to remove than these small towns can muster. Completed from 1995 to 2005, AMD and Art's 35-acre park spanned a decade of planning and preparation. This presentation provides a brief overview of the history of Vintondale and AMD and Art, analyzes the park's landmarks and art installations, and ends with a synopsis of this project's successes and failures. AMD and Art Park is a powerful land reclamation project that successfully rehabilitated Vintondale, but its outreach and education initiatives ultimately fell short. In 1892, a group of Blacklick Land Improvement Company investors founded Vintondale, Pennsylvania. Vinton Colliery opened several mines in the following decades, but environmental regulations and economic pressures caused Vintondale's Mine No. 6, its last operating coal mine, to close in 1968. By 1995, the ecological devastation wrought by decades of mineral extraction was apparent in the rust-colored waters caused by acid mine drainage, or AMD, and large black mounds of mine refuse piles that dot the landscape. Both AMD and coal waste have a history of poisoning streams and ecosystems across Appalachia, killing the local aquatic species and perpetuating stream pollution. These natural hazards and a lack of industry have also led to the economic decline of the region, with an estimated 18% poverty rate in 2003, shortly before the park opened. When Allen Comp arrived in town in the mid-1990s, he noted a decline in the health, environment, and mentality of the people of Vintondale. Dr. Alan Comp's background in historic preservation and Appalachian industry uniquely positioned him to address environmental and economic devastation in Vintondale. Comp wanted each step of the remediation process to be interdisciplinary, creatively and thoughtfully designed, and align with the goals and interests of the local community that had been excluded from decision-making processes for far too long. AMDNR's plan for the site was a monumental public park that physically intervened in a landscape of reclaimed mine lands, once the central locale for the Vinton Colliery. This initiative aimed to, quote, artfully transform environmental liabilities into community assets, end quote, and had a team encompassing engineers, landscape architects, artists, and community volunteers. Park assets include water reclamation ponds, recreational sports fields, natural hiking trails, intentional landscape architecture, and 3 public art installations, totaling to a cost of around $800,000. The first of these 3 public art installations is Mine Number 6 Portal. Created by Anita Lucero, Mine Number 6 Portal is an etched piece of black polished stone depicting miners during a shift change. It was placed in Mine Number 6 abandoned entrance and draws upon a film still from a 1938 home movie shot by Julius Murray, a former miner. This piece serves as a monument to honor the workers' physical labor and interaction with the mine. Mine Number 6 Portal connects deeply to the environmental extraction at the site, aiming to bestow a legacy of commemoration and heritage rather than resources and the market. The etching works to reconcile the poor working conditions and lasting environmental impact of coal mining with the real faces of historic miners. The selection of this particular frame from the video speaks to the complexity of the simple act of a shift change for these poverty-stricken miners. Those who are leaving are re-entering an atmosphere of clean air and light, yet they bid farewell to their peers who plunge into the darkness of the mines. The dark coloration of the men's faces harkens to the suit that will soon cover their bodies and demonstrates the legacies of mining that pervade contemporary Appalachian culture. The Great Map is a mosaic inlaid into a concrete slab and is based on Vintondale's 1923 Sanborn Fire Insurance Map. The map presents the edifices and layout of Vinton Colliery Company at the height of its production. Jessica Lydell, a mosaic artist who created the map, chose to surround the tiles with a border of black stone etchings, including the town's achievements and the word hope written in 26 languages that immigrant miners brought to Vintondale in the 20th century. Its functionality as an actual map is limited, as its true purpose lies behind its inherent contrast of Vintondale's past and present. The Great Map challenges the assumption that the town's glory exudes from its Gilded Age height of economic development, and instead purports that the community's present cultural diversity and relationship with reclaimed land supersede its industrial past. The depiction of the town's past through a historic insurance map ironically shows how fear of fire or water damage was eventually overshadowed by the marginalization that decimated the town's economy and natural landscape. The last work, Clean Slate, is an eco-artwork that consists of 2 large pieces of Pennsylvanian slate and marks the location where the clean water leaves the park and flows back to nature. After landscape architecture students Claire Fullman and Emily Nye won AMDNR's National Student Design Competition, the nonprofit implemented their piece of land art near Blacklick Creek. Clean Slate connects most directly to a history of American contemporary eco-art, such as the works of Robert Smithson, and strikes a larger conversation about resituating natural material and environmentalist interventionism to garner attention and response. As a site-specific work, its form follows its ambience and allows the minimalist piece to respond to community needs. This aptly named artwork provides a literal clean slate for the landscape by repositioning its rocky materials as a replacement for the coal refuse mounds that piled up following decades of extraction. While an analysis of AMDNR Park's components suggests the nonprofit achieved its goals, did the project truly revitalize and uplift Vintondale's landscape and community? For the most part, I'd argue it did. This coalition of AMDNR and Vintondale residents actualized a clean landscape rid of coke piles and AMD drainage, constructing a community space equipped with commemorative art and recreational zones. They not only rehabilitated the nearby Blacklick Creek, but also the spirit of the town, instilling local pride and hope that had been lost decades prior. Despite its accomplishments, much can be learned from this experiment. Vintondale remains an economic ghost town. Compared to the 18% poverty rate and average per capita income of $11,689 directly before the park was built, Vintondale now has a 23.33% poverty rate and an average per capita income of $41,528 as of 2025. Just as these numbers demonstrate, some growth has been achieved, but there is much work to be done to bring small Appalachian communities like Vintondale out of poverty. While AMD and Art's undertaking successfully created a site for artistic intervention, water reclamation, and community pride, AMD and Art Park was subject to numerous pitfalls that can inform work on future large-scale eco-art parks and reclaimed energy wastelands. Undeterred by a past of economic extortion and a derelict environmental situation, the community of Vintondale and nonprofit AMD&R developed a large-scale reclamation park that responds to current needs, celebrates local heritage, and alleviates health and environmental hazards. Its artistic installations reframe the way we view devastated mining communities like Vintondale and highlight the role of the project's visual iconography in its reception and political momentum, all while remaining vital to an ongoing eco-critical dialogue. Despite its successes, AMD&R Park is only the first step of reclamation needed for Vintondale. The park exemplifies an excellent starting point, but also demonstrates that revitalization cannot be achieved in just a few years. Systemic problems must be attacked at the root and encompass solutions both politically, socially, and environmentally. This leads us to ponder how similar projects can maximize sustainable education and outreach initiatives while minimalizing costs, and if AMD and Art Park's land reclamation model is ultimately the best choice for Appalachia and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. And now I believe it's Bart's turn to introduce the next two panelists.
It is. Just to reintroduce myself in case anyone has joined, since we started, I'm Bart Pashai. I'm an assistant professor of art history at the University of Tennessee in Chattanooga. And I think I just also before I introduce our wonderful students, I just wanted to say that collaborating and working really closely with the Hunter in particular is really exciting, I think, for us in the Department of Art, for obvious reasons. But also, I think in getting our students the opportunity to speak and learn from each other, especially in this kind of like national-based forum out of Chattanooga, is really exciting. So without any further ado, I will introduce the first student I have mentored, and that is Logan Rushford. Logan is a major in photography and media art, and is a junior at the University of Tennessee in Chattanooga. And they also have a burgeoning interest in issues of ecology and gender. So, without further ado, I will give the floor to you, Logan.
Thank you, and thank you all for having me today. I will be talking today about two artists who focus on sustainability in art, sustainability in their studio work as ceramicists. And that is Yulia Bakliuk and Joan Takayama Ogawa. One second. Yulia Makliuk is a ceramic artist from the Ukraine. She was an environmental scientist before she picked up ceramics. In 2023, she was forced by the war conditions in the Ukraine, and with little electric power, she devised a way to lower her carbon footprint when making ceramics by developing a non-bisque firing technique. This means she doesn't fire clay as the traditional way where you fire clay. A bisque fire would be like you fire the clay and then you glaze it and then you fire it again. She would, like I said, she was originally a climate scientist, but always wanted to do ceramics. Through her research, she found that the average carbon footprint of a stoneware mug is about 7.5 kilograms of CO2. This covers all stages of the life cycle of a mug: raw material, extraction for glaze, clay, and packaging, as well as local transport of these goods to the studio, manufacture of the mugs at the studio, and dishwashing of the mug. Firing the clay accounts for about 1.4 kilograms of the CO2. The other highest amount comes from dishwashing, which accounts for 2.2 kilograms of CO2. Though this can easily be remedied by less washing and using cold water, the firing of the clay was a lot more tricky to figure out. First, she eliminated bisque firing. This combined with better user habits took the CO2 down to 4.1 kilograms a mug, but she wanted to go more extreme. To achieve a zero carbon footprint mug, she converted to solar powered firing. Then she reduced the plastic in her packaging by converting to recycled paper. This made the carbon footprint half a kilogram of CO2. Though it's not zero, she created a sustainable practice that can easily be further reduced by the user or potter simply by planting trees as an offset. This offset would not be achievable if the footprint was over 1 kilogram of CO2. She doesn't stop here in her practice. Makliuk often digs for raw local clay and recycled glass to make glazes. This science and philosophy around sustainability through the life cycle of her pieces is what motivates her work. Through Makliuk's series, Emotional Labor, you can see two main focus areas: global climate change and the effects of war on the Ukraine. This series consists of several ceramic hearts that are made from shards from the rubble found in the aftermath of bombings during the war. This to me not only highlights the needless violence inflicted on civilians, but also the environmental cost of war. This combines her devastation for her country as a cathartic processing of war and also a way to practice sustainability in spite of it. Gyula Makliuk became an artist out of necessity. She needed to do something with the pain of war in her country. She also came to her sustainability out of necessity. The effects of climate change are evident even outside war. Globally, coral reefs are dying. Ocean environments we hardly know anything about are disappearing from us. Because of this, I'm also interested in ceramic artists who are on the other side of the coin, who have been using sustainable research as a practice for years and came to political aspects second. Through this research, I came across a ceramic artist who has been putting low fire and other sustainable techniques in her work for decades, Joan Takayama Ogawa. Takayama Ogawa is a third-generation Japanese-American ceramicist from Pasadena, California, with a master's degree from Stanford and a current professor at Otis College of Art and Design, focusing on ceramics and 3D printing. Currently in her class, she has been teaching she has been teaching at various institutions for over 3 decades and has works in the MoMA, Smithsonian, and other acclaimed galleries around the world. She has traced her ancestry back from family ceramic collections donated to the LA Modern Art Museum in the 60s to ancient kiln founders in 15th century Japan. Takayama Ogawa uses both hand building and wheel throwing techniques to create her ceramic pieces. Hand building allows for more sculptural and organic forms, while wheel throwing provides precision and symmetry. Takayama says she walks the talk as an example for her art students and viewers alike. She uses low temperature clay instead of porcelain as part of her environmental and sustainable ceramics making. Her kilns are computer programmed to fire late at night when energy rates are lower. She modifies commercial low fire glazes using raw materials, resulting in what she calls her 50 shades of white glaze, which is actually closer to 100 different shades of white glazes. This commitment to glaze recipes pays off with a wider range of colors at a more sustainable level than buying hundreds of glazes outright. Takayama Ogawa often uses motifs inspired by nature, such as flowers, leaves, and other plant forms often found in Japanese traditional ceramic motifs. She was also inspired to do her many works on coral reefs from scuba trips with her now husband. Through these trips, she saw how much the coral reefs were dying. And according to the Australian government's long-term monitoring program of the coral reefs from 2023 to 2024, the Great Barrier Reef saw its 5th largest coral bleaching event since 2016, but the reef has actually grown in coral coverage by 39%. This is due to conservation efforts and awareness made through both campaigns and artwork. In her work, Sustained Beauty, she creates a green, very alien and organic vessel. It stands at a little over 4 feet tall and has a bunch of tiny holes placed into it. It also has a shell-like shapes at the top, relating back to her inspiration of coral reefs. I feel this refers to how much we don't know about our planet, especially our oceans. The statement of this piece is literally melted in gold into the piece and reveals a lot about the artist's thinking when creating this piece. To me, it reveals the idea that we don't know much of our oceans, even though we're destroying them. The statement is what I will end this presentation with, as I think it reflects a way forward for sustainability practices through art as a whole. We must follow nature's rules. Where growth is good, we must create sustainable art and design that produces more energy than consumed. We must build a profitable, sustainable economy that works with nature, not against it. We must discover new ways to use waste to produce energy, to motivate profit, and ultimately improve the world. We can do it if artists join leaders, and leaders include artists. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions during the Q&A portion of this seminar.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Logan. I appreciate the uplifting direction for the future that you provided with us through the artist's work. So we're gonna now transition to our fourth speaker today, and the second speaker, I guess, in my cluster, who is Trinity Anthony, who is an art history major here at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, and she also has a minor in the Brock Scholars Honors Program here as well. Trinity also has increasingly a wealth of experience traveling and speaking at these kinds of academic events. So I'm very excited that she's gracing us with her presence today. So I will turn the floor over to you, Trinity, and let you start.
Okay, great. Let's see. So I will be discussing Julio Kosice's sculptures and impact of water use and conservation efforts in South America. So from 1946 to 1948, Slovakian and Argentine artist Julio Kosice created the piece Una gata de agua acunada atada velocira. Kosice uses a battery-powered mechanism to apply a pendulum-like movement to a drop of water in a clear compartment. This piece rocks back and forth independently, not needing any aid from the artist or viewer to operate. This piece stands as one of Kosice's biggest innovations within his artistic practice, but also in the wider Latin American abstract movement, with the Una gata de agua acunada atada velocira being considered the first hydrokinetic work ever made. Julio Kosice was born Fernando Falic in present-day Slovakia in 1924. He moved to Argentina's Buenos Aires as a child and remained there until his death in 2016. As a burgeoning Latin American artist, he and a group of other Latin American abstractionists spread across the region from Cuba, Brazil, Venezuela, and more, began to start various Latin American abstract art movements. This included the first Latin American art journal Arturo and the art collective Grupo Mati, which he co-founded. During this period of Kosice's career, not only was his style very influenced by his Latin American identity, but the groups he was a part of emphasized celebrating and representing Latin culture missing from the wider European abstract movement. Some of Kosice's earliest works were neo-concrete paintings, with an artistic shift occurring in 1944 when he created his first sculpture, Roy. This sculpture was experimental and revolutionary because it centered on the concept of reverse abstraction. Reverse abstraction is described as the physical and psychological engagement that the spectator plays in the dynamism and meaning of the artwork. This is essentially the symbiotic relationship of creator-viewer. Roy is a piece that invites the audience to maneuver and change its form. For the piece to reach its full potential, it requires a dialogue between the creator, creation, and audience. In many ways, this work encapsulated the Latin American abstractionist movement, symbolizing the act of building a network of collaboration. However, if Kosice's early work was focused on audience engagement and reverse abstraction, how did he create Una gata de agua acunada a toda velocira? First, we need to evaluate the environmental history of Latin America. During the 1920s, the decade Kosice moved to Argentina, Latin America was going through a vast ecological change. After the wake of the Great Depression and World War II, most Latin American nations were shifting their economies from exporting raw materials to increasing industrial production within the region. For Argentina, this came after already having their vast grasslands exploited and industrialized for railroads for a century. What befell and permanently changed the Latin American landscape was the establishment of the petrochemical and mining sectors. Latin America's attempt/effort to gain an even playing field after economic turmoil in the 20th century led to lax government oversight and foreign corporations' negligence, which resulted in worsening landscapes that were polluted and dangerous. Furthermore, mining tallying poisoned rivers and other bodies of water. Kosice grew simultaneously with these industries. By the time Kosice was a working artist in the 1940s, he lived in the Rio de la Plata area, which has Argentina's Matanza-Riachuelo River Basin running towards it. The river basin served as Buenos Aires' dumping ground, becoming one of the most contaminated rivers in Latin America and one of the 10 most polluted rivers in the world. With conservation efforts not being prominent, especially water conservation, Kosice made a theoretically and functionally antithetical to his previous works to represent the lack of the river basin's preservation. The piece doesn't require audience interaction or even its artist engagement after he crafted it, to work, to move, to relay its message. Kosice represents through the sculpture and its holding of a drop of water, as the title says, hanging in the balance out of reach of Argentinian citizens' control, just as it swings outside of the audience's control. However, in the same year of the creation of his work, Una gata de agua cunada a toda velocidad, where he represents the powerlessness of the Argentine citizen at the mercy of its government, Kosice looks forward to a utopian path that people outside the government can create. Fueled by science fiction and fantasy and filled with a flamboyant design comes Kosice's hydrospatial city. Inspired by his writing in 1944 stating, "Man will not end his days on earth," is an architectural collection of works going against the Western architecture that Kosice claims reinforces class division, socioeconomic inequality, and environmental degradation, which were being compounded due to astronomical population growth. The solution he offered to move toward the future was a city of semi-open molecule habitats suspended 5,000 feet above the ground, powered by oxygen and hydrogen. In many ways, Kosice's hydrospatial city was a return to form. Reflecting on Una gata de agua cunadas a toda velocidad, Kosice planted a national and local motif in Latin American abstraction, prompting a new awareness of land and place. And in the process, he confronted Latin America's environmental history. Beginning with Kosice's early sculptures, which focused on reverse abstraction and audience engagement, Kosice reacted and represented his environment in his seminal hydrokinetic work. Kosice's transition from mobile to autonomous sculptures foretells his metamorphosis into embedding the thought and action of sustainability into his work. Kosice was relentlessly innovative and believed in the power of community providing change, whether it was the artistic communities he was a part of in Latin America or the Argentine people in the wake of ecological decline. Kosice's transition from social critique to social reform provided a doorway into a new kind of audience interaction. Kosice's hydrospatial city, as mystical as it is a metaphor for hope and the power of sustainability through community engagement. Kosice prompts the viewers to mentally participate in the idea of a more sustainable future, of a life for Argentine children that includes safe water. He makes the theoretical more important than the physical interaction with the work, believing even a spark of hope could ignite real change and sustainability for a better future for Argentina and Latin America. And then here's my work cited.
Thank you so much, Trinity. Since This is our first speaker. I guess I will turn it over to Adira since we'll take a very quick break. Oh, Adira, you're still muted.
Sorry about that. So thank you, Bart, and thanks to the first four speakers. You just opened up a world of discussion topics, so I'm excited to get into that. We will continue with our discussions, and I'm really excited to introduce Zoe Price and Tara Parsons, who will be sharing their work with us. First, we'll have Zoe Price, who is a senior at Emory University, majoring in art history and architecture, and is interested in exploring artwork where the two intersect. She's from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, where she first encountered the artwork of Mary Miss, which would inspire the subject of her honors thesis and also the paper she'll be presenting today. And with that, I will pass the baton to Zoe.
Thank you so much, Adara. Let me just get my screen shared. Can y'all see that? Wait. Yes, sorry. Okay, perfect. So yeah, my paper, like Adara said, is taken from a larger thesis in which I look at the practice of artist Mary Miss, seen in the front here. Miss has been working as an artist in public since the mid to late 60s when she took her artwork out of the gallery and into public space. Her early work, such as Battery Park Landfill, seen here, explores the minimalist concerns of the phenomenological experience of the body's relationship to the object on the site. The site, however, remains a neutral backdrop for Mrs. Constructions, as she does not address the history of the place, the urban context of a city, or the environmental condition of the site. For example, here, this work is cited on a landfill in New York City, but Miss is not engaging with the landfill as an environmental condition. In the present, she is focusing on the organization she founded, City as a Living Laboratory, or CUL, under which artists and scientists collaborate with residents of urban communities to create public art and initiate programming that attempts to bring awareness to environmental issues and provide sustainable solutions. But how did she get from the neutral site construction to the environmentally oriented sign? This paper is taken from a larger thesis in which I trace this evolution more extensively, looking at 4 key moments in her practice. But for this paper, I focus on the period after Miss formally lays the charge for a change in public sculpture and begins to incorporate the sustainable into the phenomenological. She formally lays this charge in 1982 with her lecture on a redefinition of public sculpture. And then after this, we see that her practice takes a pedagogical and sustainable turn, and she begins to try and educate her viewer as a member of a social body who influences the ecosystem. I argue that this moment marks a pivotal shift in Mrs. Practice, transitioning away from the monumental site-specific sculptures designed for phenomenological engagements to projects that actively engage issues of sustainability. One of the work that is representative of Mrs. New commitments is Greenwood Pond Double Site. It was commissioned by the Des Moines Arts Center for a pond on their grounds, and Miss describes this construction as the ideal project. The pond had recently become clogged with algae, and the picnic areas around it had fallen into disrepair. Here, Miss had the opportunity to revitalize both the ecological and social functions of the site. In the state Miss found the pond, it necessitated dredging, filtration, dams upstream, and cleansing vegetation. Architect Daniel Abramson tells us that Miss, along with her collaborators, constructed a functional wetland, including a water lily area, a woodland wildflower walk, a stone bank terrace of prairie grass, and a wet meadow planted with cattails, which revived the derelict pond. I've included here It's looking like this image was not as good quality as I thought, but this is a scan of some of the research that Miss did along with scientists into vegetation that could make a functional wetland. So we see here that her interaction with the site in Des Moines is quite different than her early work. She not only built a construction that changed the experience of the landscape, but she also revitalized the site to serve a new social and sustainable function, which then became bound to the embodied experience the work produced. Miss has redefined the site, not only engaging the topography, but also the ecological condition, history, and social context of the site. And the viewer is no longer understood as a mere body or unmarked subject. Rather, Miss is attempting to effect a change in their consciousness about their place within a larger ecosystem, be that social or environmental, through education. The construction Miss created at Greenwood Pond has been described as an outdoor classroom because of the educational programs that it houses. The exploration of the component parts of the construction, similar to some of Miss's early work, still produce an embodied experience, but those component parts now serve multiple programs as requested by multiple different clients. The construction stakes out a large leaf shape negotiating between the pond and the shore, and on the northernmost edge of the pond, there is a tower that the viewer can climb up and look out over the pond and the construction. On the other side of the construction, we see a concrete trough which extends into the pond. The lip of this trough meets the surface of the pond, making the viewer feel as if they are in between the space of the land and the water. Sitting on the bench in the trough, the viewer's eyes directly meet the plane of the pond, and this serves an educational function, allowing the viewer to observe the plant and animal life that comes to the surface up close. This is a characteristic feature of Miss's constructions, a transitional space between above and below. Looking across the pond, the viewer's vision tells them one thing, which is that they see a flat pond. But when they explore the construction, they come and they descend into it, producing a dual educational and phenomenological experience. While the pieces of the construction were based on what local institutions requested, centered around the educational function of the demonstration wetland, there are still moments such as these where the viewer is prompted to reflect upon the condition of their body in space as it explores both the site and the construction. Miss wants to create public art that combines embodied experiences with social, educational, and sustainable programming that cause the viewer to reflect upon their relationship to the environment. Greenwood Pond takes the form of what I term, overall in Miss's practice, the playground, meaning that the viewer freely explores these component parts, but it serves the educational function of the classroom, which is the direction we see her practice move towards post-1982. I argue that Greenwood Pond double site is one of the best examples of the merging of the sustainable and the phenomenological. It is accessible, located on a site that was already in use by the public. It was designed through a series of community collaborations, and it was built with community programming in mind. It is an elegant marriage of the playground and the classroom. However, the project took 7 years to realize, and given the collaborations, planning, constructing, and restoration of the wetland, Miss said she would have loved to keep building things in the world like this, but it was just not possible. She describes the frustration she felt in the 1990s, spending years on other proposals similar to double site that did not happen. And that is how City as a Living Laboratory came about. Miss realized that ephemeral, social, and frankly smaller works were the ones that she was able to complete. The call works are not dependent on the physical manifestations you see here, and in my thesis, I actually question their effectiveness. But they rely on programming and artists getting out and interacting with the public for sustainable ends. But even if there is a chance that these works are not received in their intended manner, as I argue that a sign such as this can only convey so much information, they have more potential to create the environmental change Miss wants to see because they are more likely to be completed. As I have been writing this paper, there has been an ongoing lawsuit between Mary Miss and the Des Moines Arts Center regarding the demolition of Greenwood Pond double site. In December of 2023, MIS was notified that the Art Center was planning to demolish the work, as many areas of the construction had fallen into disrepair and were described as dangerous and unsalvageable. On April 4th, 2024, MIS filed a lawsuit against the Art Center, seeking monetary damages on the grounds that the dilapidated state of the construction was a breach of contract signed in 1994. The lawsuit put a temporary stop to the demolition of the work, and many artists, museums, and architects came forward against the work being demolished. In early January of 2025, however, the lawsuit was settled, and MIS will receive $900,000, and the Art Center will proceed dismantling the work. The story of Greenwood Pond double site speaks to the challenges of realizing and maintaining public art that is more than so-called plop art. The work really relies from start to finish on interaction with the public. Collaboration was necessary to create it, and ongoing collaboration between the Art Center and the community was required to maintain it. It is not only an exemplar of monumental, sustainable public art that addresses the public rather than just occupying public space, but it also serves as a case study on the difficulty of creating and maintaining work that serves a sustainable function, requires collaboration, and seeks to educate the viewer. Increasingly, as sustainable public art is afforded less space, it must be shaped by its educational and outreach function rather than its physical form. And that is where I look forward in Mrs. Practice to the call works, and we see why they have shrunken in scale, but their programming has increased. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you. Let me stop sharing my screen.
Thanks so much, Zoe. And we're going to continue our look at modern contemporary artists and their connection to their communities and the way that they're using art as activism with our final speaker for the day, Tara Parsons. Tara is a senior at Barnard College of Columbia University, majoring in art history with a minor in economics. Tara's research explores the political potential of modern art, and she was awarded the Lucille Hook Grant from Barnard College for her work on Delcy Morelos, whose work she will be sharing today. She has assisted Dr. Dorota Bissell in research on Latin American art in relation to the struggle for democracy, and Dr. Alejandro Paz in studying the impact of English translations of foreign language media on the Middle East. Dedicated to a comprehensive understanding of the relationship between art and politics, she has worked at the foundation of minimalist artist Robert Ryman and the New Fine Arts, as well as for the U.S. Congress and the G7. Likewise, she served as president of the Columbia Art Market Society and led several art-related clubs focused on making contemporary and modern art more accessible. So with that, I welcome Tara to share her PowerPoint and her paper with us.
Of course, thank you so much. Here we go. Okay. My presentation examines how Colombian artist Delcy Morelos, born in 1967, employs abstract form and earth as material to address political violence, environmental destruction, and social injustices stemming from Colombia's internal conflicts in her artwork, El Abrazo, installed at Dia Chelsea. By incorporating indigenous cosmologies into her practice and portraying the earth as feminine, Morelos confronts the enduring violence in Latin America and offers an alternative perspective on land. Morelos was born in 1967 in Tirolata, Cadorbo, near the Caribbean Sea in northern Colombia, somewhere around here. Growing up in Cadorbo, she witnessed the disproportionate violence inflicted upon Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities during the Colombian civil conflict, which dated from 1964 to 2016. Consequently, Morelos is interested in the body and the violence it faces, grappling with the Colombian civil conflict, particularly the neo-extractivist mode of production dominant in Colombia. Colombia's extractivist economy, driven by the relentless accumulation of non-renewable natural resources through overexploitation, prioritizes extractive mega projects such as mining and industrial agriculture. The Colombian government and transnational corporations have often relied on right-wing paramilitary groups to advance its modernizing goals, a strategy that frequently involves the forced displacement and murder of indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities, whose research-rich lands are deemed unused. The entrenched dominance of Western rationality creates barriers for indigenous perspectives and cosmologies, particularly the concept of Pachamama, which views nature and humanity as interconnected earth beings, and a term that particularly means earth as mother, from entering political discourse. By dismissing these alternative viewpoints as inferior, the Colombian state justifies the commodification of land and the oppression of indigenous communities, rendering them invisible outside of the capitalist mode of production. The correlation between illegal mining predominantly occurring on indigenous lands, despite indigenous communities owning 3% of the land, 49% of mining occurs on indigenous land. So the correlation between illegal mining and sexual violence further demonstrates how dominant rational ideologies reinforce social hierarchies and validate violence by dehumanizing indigenous populations. While cosmologies like Pachamama could offer a paradigm shift advocating for the demodification of nature, and a relationship of equality and respect with the environment, Colombia remains unable to conceive of alternatives to neo-extractivism due to the prevailing dominance of rational frameworks. And as an example, this photo shows a coal mine also near the Caribbean Sea in Colombia that was funded partially by the US company Exxon as well as the Colombian government, and it used to be the former home of the Wayuu people. However, this has now triggered a humanitarian crisis in the area, completely polluting this entire department's water supply and leading the Wayuu people to actually stop dreaming because of the synergistic trauma of this extractivist site. In this complex landscape of social environmental conflicts and ancestral struggles, Delcy Morelos navigates her work, striving to address the systematic injustices in Colombia by championing the power of indigenous cosmologies. Her formal education at La Escuela de Bellas Artes de Cartagena and her training under Isas Ramon, a local indigenous leader and shaman, exposed Morelos to a variety of practices that would influence her work and response to violence. In the 1990s, she explored the colored red, associating it with blood and bodily violence in Colombia. Nos un río e una madre, from 1996, responded to the massacre of the Embra people by paramilitaries due to the Embra people protesting the construction of an extractivist dam on one of the major rivers in the areas. Red envelops the canvas, leaving little room for any underlying paper to show. By portraying the red as a river, fluid life expands. Morelos likens the flow of river to the flow of blood, highlighting the river's centrality to life. By illustrating the connection between body, blood, nature, and violence, and elucidating the river's ability to endow life, Nos un río e una madre exemplifies indigenous cosmologies like earth beings and Pachamama. By the 2010s, Morelos transitioned to working with soil, exploring its physiological and symbolic properties. Ava from 2013 used red soil rich in iron, the same element that gives blood its red color. Layers of diluted pigment symbolize the tension between color, matter, and corporeal form, offering a reflection on the constraints and constructs of the human body within the natural environment. In Miranda's, an installation in an underground shopping mall, she covered the walls with soil to immerse the audience in what she dubs the womb of the earth, disrupting industrialized space with the presence of land. This intervention, inspired by the indigenous concept of buen vivre, living well in harmony with nature, suggests an alternative to capitalist paradigms. In 2023, the Dia Art Foundation commissioned Morelos to create El Abrazo, transforming their Chelsea gallery into an immersive earth installation. Upon entering, visitors first encounter Selenial Terreno, a darkened space where their vision adjusts while the scent of cinnamon, anise, and clove overwhelms their senses. This sensory disorientation primes them for their engagement with El Abrazo, the second section of the exhibition. In contrast to Selenial Terreno, El Abrazo is brightly lit, requiring another visual adjustment. A towering mound of earth, interwoven with hay and straw, fills the space. Its rounded texture form invites audience to touch, creating a haptic experience. As viewers walk around the installation, the shape of El Abrazo guides them in circumambulation, constraining their bodily movements. Eventually, the audience reaches a V-shaped entrance at the rear of El Abrazo, which resembles a womb. Upon entry, the V-shaped entrance only narrows so that the earth embraces the audience. Surrounded in darkness and earth, they hear their breath amplified due to the acoustics of the piece that prevent all sound except from what's coming from within to be heard in this V-shaped entrance. Becoming further constrained by the narrowing entrance, each step heightens the body's connection to the earth until visitors find themselves engulfed in darkness and unable to see the skylights or move freely. They must return to the light and complete the cyclical journey that mirrors the life and death, especially given that you enter through Selenial Terreno, you go to El Abrazo, and to exit again, you must perform this circular journey, exiting through each step of the exhibit. El Abrazo resists traditional engagement, instead requiring viewers to use their disparate senses, smell, hearing, and touch to apprehend it. The blurred boundaries between environment, gallery space, artwork, and audience disrupt conventional modes of perceiving and interacting with art, especially those that typically emphasize the use of sight. With soil imported from upstate New York, the Dia Chelsea location functions as a non-site for the Hudson River Valley, displacing visitors further. Thereby, Morelos forces the audience to acknowledge land and nature, and although invisible to them in their metropolitan context, importantly constitutes the gallery space. Through these distinction, El Abrazo's spectrality destabilizes dominant view of land as a commodity and our preconception of the gallery space as a neutral white walls, reintroducing indigenous perspectives that recognize land as a living entity. El Abrazo's towering presence overwhelms the audience senses and guides their movements, asserting the earth's agency. The womb-like entrance further accentuates the exhibition's overall experimental journey, symbolizing the cyclical nature of life and death. These elements of El Abrazo underscores the Earth's dual capacity to give and take life, Earth as a living being. In doing so, Morelos imbues the essence of Pachamama into her creations, inviting viewers to reconsider their relationship with the Earth and recognize its presence in their life. This confrontation between the commodifying logic of neo-extractivism and indigenous worldviews creates an aesthetic and political rupture. Morelos employs negative pleasure, a sensory overload that disrupts cognitive expectations through this non-traditional sensory engagement to expose the limitations of rational ideologies. By challenging the audience's ingrained perspective, Elabrazo momentarily suspends this extractivist logic, allowing a different way of knowing the land to emerge. In doing so, Morelos creates a space where indigenous cosmologies are political agents. By approaching her work through regarding the land as the base from which social structures arrive, Morelos' new framework, rooted in Pachamama, contains the possibility to move beyond the systematic oppression of neo-extractivism. Elabrazo interrogates the dominant view of the land has led to environmental devastation and the bloodshed of indigenous communities in Colombia. By proposing Pachamama as an equal political agent, Elabrazo and the work of Delcy Morelos charts a course to a more equitable future.
Thank you so much, Tara. And I invite everyone to turn on their cameras. And we are going to begin our Q&A. But before we do, I want to give a big round of applause to all of the students for their hard work and for all that they shared with us today. So you guys, clap for yourselves. All right. So anyone who is listening and would like to enter questions or ideas into the chat, please do. I saw so many themes reemerging, and I saw your papers kind of dancing with one another in the ways that you connected with themes of water, of indigenous cosmologies, of deep engagement and awareness of the audience, of art catalyzed by times of strife and oppression, and so many other ideas that came out. And I was going to invite Bart if he would like to start us off in discussing and connecting some of these ideas and asking some of the students questions.
Sure. Yeah, I completely agree with Adira. I think also as all of you just kind of noticed as we move through, I think the way that even just like earthen material, even right like the materialities of artworks, right? The earthen materialities of artworks, the liquid materialities of artworks, engage in kind of environmental questions, both in terms of right critique and also I think in forging futures. I think that was also a really I think critical aspect of so many of the papers. We're looking at artists who are trying to do something with their work and not just creating, right, for the sake of art itself, but are really trying to intervene really urgently, like into a problem, and are really actively using art through this kind of engagement or through even just reflecting the processes of its own making, right, as a kind of engagement that helps guide towards some other kind of world that maybe we aren't there yet, but right, there's a way in which I think whether we're thinking about, I guess I'm just thinking about TARS because it was just the most recent, right? But even just thinking about who gets to be a political agent, right, in determining those futures and what it means to be not only people, right, but also right more than human agents thinking about the earth, right, as or like Andean concepts, right, of Pachamama, for instance. But I think in a lot of the presentations, there's this really kind of um, this, I think, desire from a lot of you to kind of look at this spark forward. And I'm just curious if any of you have kind of more thoughts about this future, this kind of futurisms that is kind of emerging from these really diverse ways that y'all are coming, y'all, because I'm in Chattanooga, that y'all are coming at thinking through sustainability and creative practices. So yeah, just to recap, so I guess I'm asking you kind of a broad question to anyone really about the kind of maybe urgency of this kind of future-oriented perspectives that so many of you highlighted.
I can start off if you like. I think that something that kind of all of our presentations showed and just the different approaches to it is how locality is so important. Like I think me and Zoe had really similar works where it's like in an eco art sense, and you're looking at eco artists who are working in America. And then you take a look at like Tara's work, and I think like Logan's as well was more kind of international, looking at things that work in different places. So I think that focusing on the local community is normally the best way to go about environmentalism, and maybe that kind of comes across as like an obvious answer, but more along the lines of just, from my perspective, I don't think there's a one size fits all solution. And it's really interesting to me to see the kind of diversity of ideas, the diversity of materiality that we've seen throughout our presentations today. So kind of a cop out, but I think it's important to say.
I totally, sorry if it's okay for me to jump in. Um, I totally agree, and it's really interesting too. And like my paper kind like you really, I feel like with all of our presentations, like you can't have sort of like sustainable artwork with like a sort of, yeah, deep-rooted sense of place and site specificity. And it's also like how in contemporary art, the definition of site specificity has changed so much over time. And I think that a lot of these show that, and how artists, like what it means to engage with a site, has really changed, and the sort of like the power that that has, and how artists are now trying to affect a sustainable change through site-specific work. And I think like we saw that all here, and it's really interesting to think about that in a like larger lineage of art history.
I think to jump in from there, especially what you brought up, especially about how site specificity has changed so much, it reminded me of Mi Won Kwan's text from the early 2000s, One Site After Another, in which she emphasizes how site-specific art is so often co-opted back into the institution. And I think all of these different artists represent something that transcends that, at least for obviously my artist. And as a testament to her work, all of it is temporary. I mean, they are all actual works of soil, and she does use a binder for it to preserve it for X amount of time, but at a certain point, it returns back to the earth, and it doesn't form a part of the institution, and it doesn't become this sort of commodity that these artists are working against. And I think that's something that I find really powerful. And I guess as a side note as well, in terms of looking towards the future and trying to enact change with all of these artists, I think something I think about, at least again, like I'm very focused on Delcy Morelos and kind of inundated about everything there is about her work, but she often refers to her process in multiple press releases and exhibition statements as akin to Plato's allegory of the den, in which you go into these artworks having a specific view of the world and you find it sort of overturned and challenged by this piece of art. And when you come back again and exit the gallery space, you are carrying this new understanding of the world with you. And that's kind of what you need to have. And it's us, the audience members, that go outside of the art world and re-enter this political environment and are here to make the changes that we learn about through art.
I've also been really enjoying going and looking at like Latin American futurist art or indigenous futurism, where it these people are more interested in young children and like the new generation coming up and attempting to fix and empower these young people into knowing how their land is being abused or exploited, and through art giving them autonomy of we can do something about this in the future. Um, and yeah, I've been really enjoying definitely looking outside of just the more, I guess, North American, um, like conservation or sustainability related art, because in Latin America, there's the just entire movement and the way the sustainability is tied to their identity gives it just this whole new power and like very specific way in which they're doing and presenting things, which just feels very different than some other things I've seen here in North America. Uh,
But I think there are also at the same time, uh, I was thinking Emalaya actually, um, I thought your example of the author who is spending all these times in these desert landscapes, like in and around California, and has these really like complex relationships with indigenous people there um, in the early 20th century, um, and kind of using those relationships and reflecting that environmental, like thinking about actually, I mean, pioneering maybe is the wrong adjective to use in this context. Um, but I think the forward-looking characteristics, right? I think of this project that you introduced us to, um, in and that's being published, and then that like those relationships and those conversations actually were already happening, 120 years ago. For me, I think was also actually um, really eye-opening in what we also think we know about the past and what we think we know, especially if we think about places like the American West, and the kind of politics there. So I wonder too, right? I guess the reason I'm thinking about that too, right, is that I think Trinity in your um, kind of like critique of like the ways that these art worlds and cultural spaces between like North America and South America are like quite distinctive. I wonder too if it's because we also aren't really looking at some of the work that actually is already there. And actually like research presentations like MLI has actually like serve really critical purposes in making us realize what we haven't been looking at. But I'm just thinking out loud. One thing that I was actually, Logan, I was so surprised when you were talking about Yulia McLuke's ceramic process, and then she has that like really great graphic of like, oh, these are all the ways that CO2 is created in the process of like making a mug. But I was really shocked that so much of it was just warming, like using hot water. And then it made me feel really guilty about like using a dishwasher on a hot setting. And I was just like, oh, should I not be? I was like, oh, I should employ more sustainable practices that way. Um, but I'm curious, right? Because in some ways, right, like I'm curious if she does Makluk sell mugs like commercially, and like what is her relationship to like the market? Because I think a lot of the artists that we've looked at and authors that we've talked about today are kind of thinking more really socially engaged works, right? But like creating mugs on a small scale, like for consumers, is actually kind of different. So I'm curious if you know anything about that.
yeah, so she does sell her mugs, but it's not even like through a website. She just does soft drops of them on her Instagram type deal. So it's very grassroots selling. It's not like she's getting them manufactured. She's just making so many through this process that she's come up with, and then that's how she's selling them.
Which I guess is kind of its own, maybe even the decision to not have anything manufactured in this kind of industrialized way also has its own, right, like connection to these like processes of sustainability.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like this idea of like soft drops on Instagram. Yeah. I wonder if there are any questions from the audience. Okay. Audience, you're welcome to ask direct questions in the chat. But there's also no pressure at the same time.
And also, all the students are welcome to ask of each other because you really did dovetail in ways that you probably didn't anticipate before we got here today. And what Bart said about Emalaya's, I think we put hers first just chronologically, but seeing it as kind of the seed out of which so many of these other artists grew, even if they weren't aware of her work. And then that question that any of you might want to look into as you continue your work of who the precedents and who the ancestors were of your artist practice that might not have been as well documented. That could be really interesting, especially when you add in the literary arts.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had a question for Trinity, actually. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I'm super interested as well in kind of like time-based art that is going to like change a little bit over time. And I think that that's really pertinent when we're talking about environmentalism, because obviously change over time is kind of the definition of it. But I just kind of wanted your thoughts on how that change over time can affect the perception of the artwork, and how it just relates to a larger sustainable narrative. Kind of broad, but I'd love to hear about that.
So like the art pieces themselves changing over time, or also like them changing due to the like environment and also to like from a like perception or
Yeah, yeah, that's
yeah,
great. Both of
okay.
those, yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's a good question. Like specifically to Latin American art or just generally?
Whichever one you think is kind of
Yeah.
better to discuss, honestly, yeah.
I more generally, I think it can be really effective, especially when you have certain like outdoors installation based work, where you can see like water and drought, or you can see the effects of pollution on this like natural item or um, piece that is outdoors. But for Latin American art, especially, for who I was talking about, Kosice, his work, like he had water in a lot of his hydrospatial cities. And the water is like graying now, and it's graying parts of the clear architectural, you know, installation pieces that he made. And I think that's just really interesting because it kind of just shows how long this water has been there, but it also kind of shows what's happening and progressing right now. Because, he died in 2016, but, the river that was just right outside of his home in Rio de la Plata is still one of the most polluted rivers in the world. And so it's interesting that he's working with this water and it has turned his pieces yellow or gray in some parts, just as there still hasn't been a complete reform in, some of his concerns in the Argentine, or like in Argentina and in his area. But yeah, I think also the changes to his art. There's lots of pictures of children throwing up these hydrospatial cities, and they have kind of little dents in them. So I think it can be really important to, for specifically those pieces to show that they have been, I don't say that multiple people have seen it. It shows its age because it also has showed, people have been interested in conservation and sustainability for a long time, um, which gives a little hope. But yeah, I think it can just be really effective, especially for outdoor installation pieces, like as they change, for people to see that change and for it to be documented. Yeah.
I thought it might be nice to ask if Catherine has more to share, especially as our sole person coming from environmental studies, and to talk about anything she might as concluding remarks as we close out this discussion.
Sure. Thank you all again so much. This was really fascinating from start to finish. One thing that really jumped out to me, which is really the sort of fundamental question within environmental studies, has to do with just the relationship between humans and the environment. And, sort of how that is shaped, how we as people are shaped by our environments, and then how we as people in turn impact our environment in so many different ways. And so I was really struck in all of your papers with the different approaches that these artists, and in the case of Emalaya's, the writer Mary Austin, took to using their art as a means of exploring that relationship. And in some cases, in this quite literal sense of the use of specific materials and interrogating those materials and their environmental impacts, like in the case of the artist that Logan was exploring, and in other cases the ways in which the art itself encourages the individuals who are interacting with it in terms of like large scale installations to question and reorient themselves in terms of how they perceive their role within the natural world, and incorporating both these very heavily influenced by like Western scientific principles and more traditional ecological knowledge coming from indigenous cultures, that those combinations were present in different ways across so many of the different kinds of art that you all were exploring. So I just found that to be such a fascinating kind of cross-pollination that was coming through all these different works in different genres, and from both the, small scale, like across scales and across time, and in the way that there's so many different levels for the artist to engage in this kind of interrogation themselves, whether it's through their own use of certain materials, their own observational practices, or the way that they're engaging their audience into that kind of questioning of their own role within the natural world. So thank you for so much great, just rich exploration of those ideas. And as someone who comes from a literary background, I also just found so many of the artists that you're describing fascinating. And for Emalaya's article about Mary Austin, a really great opportunity for me to reintroduce myself to a writer who I've long admired, and understand her work in a more nuanced context. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Catherine and Bart, and thank you to all of our presenters. You all did a beautiful job, and it was eye-opening and fascinating, and just a wonderful few hours that we've really enjoyed spending with you. This has been recorded, as you know, so we'll be able to put that up on YouTube so that you can share that as well. And unless anyone else has anything to add, I think we'll close out for the afternoon. I wish everyone good luck on their exams and the rest of the semester. And thank you all for participating in this afternoon and the entire semester that you've been working so hard on these papers.